Hello everyone. Thank you so much to everyone supporting my channel. I'm sending love your way. I'd love for you to leave a comment telling me which city you're listening from. For those of you who are here for the first time, please consider subscribing to my channel and liking this video. It's a great way to help the channel grow, which means even more stories to share with you. Tonight, I've written a creepypasta horror story about a man, a Mexican, who bought a US passport on the dark web to enter the United States. Was it a smart idea? Stick around until the end of the story to find out. You know that feeling when you're about to do something that could either completely change your life or totally destroy it? That's exactly where I was standing, at the border crossing between Mexico and the United States, clutching a passport I'd bought on the dark web with my life savings. My name is Carlos Ramirez, and I guess I should start by telling you why I was desperate enough to drop $1,500 on a fake passport from some shadowy website called Silk Road. Back in my hometown of Ciudad Juarez, I'd been working 2 jobs, fixing cars during the day and helping at my uncle's restaurant at night. Every single peso went to supporting my sick mother and younger sister. But with the medical bills piling up and the cartel violence getting worse, I couldn't see a future there anymore. The American passport felt heavy in my pocket as I waited in line. I'd spent weeks preparing for this moment, memorizing every detail of my new identity as Miguel Herrera. I'd even changed my appearance, cutting off my long hair and shaving the beard I'd had since I was 18. The mirror showed a different person now, someone who looked more American, whatever that meant. Standing in that line, watching the border agents process people ahead of me, I kept repeating the backstory in my head. Born in San Diego, worked as a mechanic, visiting family in Mexico. Simple enough to remember, but convincing enough to explain my accent. I'd practiced saying it so many times in front of the mirror that it almost felt real. The line moved slowly, each step forward making my heart beat a little faster. I watched the agents' faces as they checked documents, some barely glancing at passports before waving people through, others scrutinizing every detail. I tried to guess which type would be checking mine. Finally, it was my turn. I stepped up to the window, forcing my hand to stay steady as I passed over the passport. The agent was older, maybe in his 50s, with grey hair and reading glasses hanging from his neck. He flipped open the passport with practiced movements, glancing between the photo and my face. That's when time seemed to slow down. His eyes lingered on the page longer than they had for others. He looked up at me, then back down at the passport. My throat went dry. The fluorescent lights overhead suddenly felt too bright, too harsh. I could feel sweat forming on my back, but I forced myself to stand still, to keep breathing normally. The agent's face gave nothing away as he stood up, passport in hand. "Sir, I need to verify something in our system. Please wait here." His tone was professional, neutral, but something in it made my stomach drop. He disappeared into a back room, taking my passport and my future with him. Minutes passed like hours. Other agents kept processing people in neighboring lanes, their voices and the shuffling of papers creating a background noise that felt distant, unreal. I noticed my reflection in the bulletproof glass, a stranger staring back at me with fear in his eyes. Then I saw them approaching, 2 more agents walking with purpose. Their faces were serious, their body language screaming authority. "Sir," one of them said, "we need you to come with us." As they led me away from the main area, past curious onlookers, and through a series of secure doors, I realized I'd made a terrible mistake. But I had no idea just how terrible it was about to become. They put me in what looked like an interrogation room straight out of those crime shows. Bare walls, metal table bolted to the floor, and one of those mirrors that you just know people are watching you through. The fluorescent light above buzzed like an angry wasp, making my growing headache even worse. I sat there for what felt like forever, watching my reflection in that mirror. The person staring back at me looked nothing like the confident guy who'd stepped up to the border crossing just an hour ago. My new haircut and clean-shaven face, which was supposed to help me blend in, now made me look scared and vulnerable. The door opened with a heavy click. 2 agents walked in, a tall woman with sharp eyes and a stocky guy who looked like he bench-pressed cars for fun. They didn't sit down. Instead, they stood on either side of the table, towering over me. The woman dropped a thick file on the table. The sound made me jump. "Mr. Herrera," she said, dragging out each syllable like she was tasting them. "Or should I say, Staff Sergeant Miguel Herrera, United States Army, 75th Ranger Regiment." My brain short-circuited. What? She opened the file and started laying out photos. Military photos, combat zones, a soldier in full gear. The face in the photos wasn't mine, but I could see why they might think it was. Same general features, similar build. But this guy's eyes, they were different, cold, empty. Interesting timing, don't you think? The male agent spoke now, his voice dripping with barely contained anger. "Showing up right when we've got an international manhunt going for a war criminal." War criminal? The room started spinning. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself as the female agent continued reading from the file. Multiple counts of civilian casualties in Afghanistan, unauthorized operations, suspected links to opium trafficking. The list goes on. She leaned forward, her face inches from mine. "Did you really think you could just walk back into the country like nothing happened?" My mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. I wanted to scream that I was just Carlos, a mechanic from Juarez trying to make a better life. But the terror of my situation froze my throat. The male agent slammed his hand on the table, making me nearly jump out of my skin. "Where's the rest of your team, Herrera? Where's the money? The weapons?" I'm not... I finally managed to stammer out in broken English. "I'm not him. Please. There's a mistake." They exchanged looks, not of doubt, but of disappointment, like they'd expected better lies from a trained military operator. "We're going to need your fingerprints and DNA," the woman said. "Standard procedure for confirming identity." Her smile didn't reach her eyes, though I doubt there's much to confirm. As they led me to another room for processing, my mind raced with horrible possibilities. Whoever this Miguel Herrera was, he was obviously dangerous. And somehow, I'd stumbled into his identity like a mouse walking into a snake's den. The fingerprint scanner beeped as they pressed each of my fingers against it. The technician swabbed the inside of my cheek for DNA. Each sample they took felt like another nail in my coffin. Even if these tests proved I wasn't Herrera, I'd still try to enter the country with a fake passport. My dream of a better life wasn't just dead. It was mutating into a nightmare that could land me in prison. But as I sat there, watching them label my samples, a worse thought crept into my mind. What if this wasn't just bad luck? What if someone had sold me this specific passport on purpose? And if they did, why? Hours passed in that tiny holding cell. I'd counted the ceiling tiles 17 times and memorized every crack in the concrete floor. My only human contact was a young border patrol officer who brought me water and supervised my bathroom breaks. He was different from the others. Younger, with kind eyes that showed something like sympathy. During one of these breaks, he hesitated before leading me back to my cell. Looking over his shoulder, he whispered, "Something's not right about your case." His voice was barely audible. "I've seen the real Herrera's file. The resemblance is there, but..." He shook his head. "They're not telling you everything." Back in my cell, his words bounced around my skull like a pinball. Not telling me everything. What else could there possibly be? But an hour later, the same officer returned with what looked like a coffee stain on some documents. As he cleaned it up, he deliberately placed one paper where I could see it. My blood turned to ice water in my veins. It was an internal memo dated 3 weeks ago. Parts of it were redacted, but I caught phrases like controlled passport release and bait identity. The implications hit me like a punch to the gut. My passport wasn't just fake, it was meant to be found. The next time the interrogators came, I saw everything differently. The way they asked questions about drug routes I couldn't possibly know. How they kept pushing about weapons stockpiles and terrorist connections. They weren't just checking if I was Herrera. They were fishing for information about his network. I was bait. A living, breathing piece of bait in some massive operation to catch a war criminal. But it got worse. That evening, I overheard 2 agents talking outside my cell. They thought I was sleeping, but their words cut through the silence like razor blades. DNA results tomorrow. Doesn't matter if he's not Herrera. Too many connections. Cartels will want him dead anyway. The full horror of my situation finally sank in. Even if I proved I wasn't Herrera, I was screwed. My fingerprints and DNA were now in a system connecting me to a war criminal. My name and face would be linked to drug cartels and the weapons trafficking. I'd become a marked man on both sides of the border. Every shadow outside my cell made me jump. Every footstep in the hallway could be someone coming to tell me I was being transferred to a federal prison. Or worse, someone working for Herrera coming to silence me. The kind-eyed officer didn't return for his shift, and I wondered if he'd been removed for helping me. That night, I couldn't sleep. The ventilation system in the holding area made weird noises that sounded like whispered conversations. I kept thinking about my mother and sister back home. Would they ever know what happened to me? Would they become targets too? The darkness in my cell seemed to pulse with all my fears, growing thicker and more suffocating with each passing hour. Then, around what must have been 3 a.m., I heard something that made my heart stop. Voices speaking in Spanish, talking about a transfer. But it wasn't the words that terrified me. It was the accent, pure Sinaloa cartel. The same accent I'd grown up hearing in the dangerous parts of Juarez. Somehow, they already knew I was here. The night grew longer, and I sat in the corner of my cell, back against the wall, waiting for either the DNA results or a cartel hitman to decide my fate. Outside, the first hints of dawn were appearing, and with them came the heavy footsteps of someone approaching my cell. The keys jingled in the lock, and I held my breath, not knowing if I was about to face salvation or execution. The door opened, flooding my cell with fluorescent light. 2 agents I hadn't seen before stood there, their faces unreadable. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. "The DNA results are in," one of them said flatly. They took me back to the interrogation room. The same buzzing light, the same mirror, but this time the atmosphere felt different. The female agent from before was there, but her aggressive energy had been replaced with something that looked almost like embarrassment. "The tests confirm you're not Miguel Herrera," she said, sliding a paper across the table. The relief that flooded through me lasted exactly 2 seconds before she continued. "However, entering the country with fraudulent documents is a serious federal offense." The next few hours passed in a blur of paperwork and procedures. They took more photos, more fingerprints. Everything was going into databases, creating a permanent record of my existence in the American system. But at least I wasn't being charged as a war criminal. At least I wasn't going to rot in a supermax prison. Instead, I was being deported. Expedited removal, they called it. No hearing, no appeals, no chance to explain. Just a one-way ticket back to Mexico and a 10-year ban from entering the United States. The kind-eyed officer from before was part of the team escorting me to the deportation transport. As we walked, he slipped something into my pocket, a small piece of paper. I couldn't read it then, but later I'd find out it was a warning. "Watch your back. You're in the system now. They'll be watching." The drive back to Mexico felt surreal. I sat in the back of a border patrol vehicle, watching the American dream fade away in the rearview mirror. But something felt off about the whole thing. They were processing me too quickly, pushing me back across the border like they couldn't wait to get rid of me, like they were afraid of keeping me around too long. When we reached the Mexican side, they didn't just dump me at the border like usual deportees. They had arranged transport all the way back to Juarez to my house. That's when real fear started creeping back in. How did they know my address? Why were they being so thorough? The sun was setting by the time I reached my street. Everything looked the same. The broken sidewalk, Mrs. Rodriguez's yapping chihuahua, the graffiti on the corner store. But it all felt different now, hostile somehow, like every shadow could be hiding someone watching me. I climbed the familiar steps to my house, each footfall echoing in the quiet street. The key shook in my hand as I unlocked the door. The house was dark. Mom and my sister were probably still at my aunt's place, where I'd asked them to stay while I was away on business. I fumbled for the light switch, but before I could reach it, I sensed something wrong. A presence, a shift in the air. My eyes adjusted to the darkness, and that's when I saw him. Sitting in my father's old armchair was a figure. The fading sunlight through the window caught his face. A face chillingly similar to mine. "Hello, Carlos. We need to talk about how you've been using my name." It was Miguel Herrera.